Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do, the podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And we have started talking about abnormal psychology, and we're going to pick back up on that. Although Tommy is barely 3 years old, the impact he has had on his family has been enormous. Even as an infant, Tommy never seemed to care about being cuddled or held. When his parents picked him up, he stayed stiff and rigid, never relaxing against their bodies as their other children had. And we had a child do that. That's when we started to suspect there was a little something different about him. Because you would pick him up, and he would arch his back and look away from you. He didn't like to be, cuddled up like the other kids did. So we knew then, that's not normal. When his parents picked him up, he stayed stiff. Both Bob and Myrna secretly feared that Tommy didn't like them, although the idea of an infant disliking its parents seemed absurd. And that's how you kind of feel. Now, any of you people out there who have autistic children, Asperger's, anything on the spectrum, you already know. You're already like, oh Lord, but you already know. This is for the folks who don't already know. Nor was Tommy as interested in being fed as the other children had always been. Now, none of mine had that problem. Every 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on the time, it was time to eat. So, thankfully, none of mine did not have, an eating problem until they got older and they didn't like the food that you were giving them, and then they might decide, I'm not eating that, but then they had to take one bite anyway. He ignored his siblings and their attempts to play with him, and eventually they stopped trying. There was some play issues in our house, and we had to work those out. When Tommy was about 6 months old, Bob and Myrna began to share their concerns about him. Was something physically wrong? Could Tommy be deaf or visually handicapped? If not, why was he so unresponsive? They consulted their pediatrician, but she could find no physical abnormality that might explain Tommy's odd behavior. And any pediatrician worth their salt would have got on this right away, because my son's pediatrician, by the time he was 2 and we started talking about this stuff, and I started telling him, he would get up against the wall like this close and he would go boom bang. He would pretend in his head he didn't necessarily like playing with the toys. He would set the toys as a visual aid beside him to look at while he did the imagination in his head. And then he was not speaking by the age of 2, and so they gave me the list, the spectrum list, and said he's got a few of these. He might have Asperger's. He's not full-blown autistic, but this might be a problem later on. And of course, it wasn't a problem later on. We had to talk to some teachers and things, but he's probably the most social child I have now. So, time changes things. The most noteworthy feature of each of their repeated visits to her was that Tommy screamed almost the entire time. And there are folks with autism who, that's the thing they do. Thankfully, none of mine was doing that. We had one that didn't like shots, and he would buck and kick, and it took 4 of us to hold that little kid down. If you can imagine a 4-year-old kid, and it takes 4 of you to hold him while one's shooting him. So, over the next several months, Tommy showed more and more clearly that he preferred to be left alone. He was unresponsive to approaches from his parents and siblings, and he actively resisted any changes in his environment. One of mine was not so good with that. He had to learn to be, because we take him to babysitters, the grandparents, and but things were different, and there were some problems adjusting, and there were some discipline that was not needed, and so we didn't put him in that situation very much after that. Visits to see the doctor's office or to his grandparents, strangers coming to the house, even rearrangements of the furniture, all resulted in fits of screaming and crying. And I remember my husband used to have a mustache, and when he shaved that off, my oldest son was not having it. He was very upset. He cried. He couldn't. Why did Dad do that to his face? Sometimes it's just, things you don't think are a big deal can be a big deal. Only when he was alone again in his crib did Tommy seem content, but he remained aloof and uninterested in his surroundings. Now at 3, Tommy has still never developed any conversational speech. And my son has a friend who has a child that's older than that and is nonverbal. And some people never become verbal. And that's just part of autism. He repeats a few words and phrases, sometimes for minutes on end. And if you ever watched the movie Rain Man, you've seen someone like that who has their little repertoire that they go through to make them feel, safe and secure. But he remains uninterested in any social contact. He shows little desire to explore the world around him and has resisted all his parents' efforts at toilet training. Tommy learned to crawl and then to walk with little difficulty. Indeed, to see him running in the backyard makes it easy to forget his behavioral problems. And that's the problem with a lot of folks. They seem okay, they look okay, and then you might think they are okay until you start scratching the surface a little bit. I had a counselor tell me one time that the problem with one of my children was that he was so smart that, when you talk to him, he presents very well. But then when you start scratching the surface a little bit, you see there's some deficits. And so that might be a problem. And for a while, he was trying to, work on his own without help because he wasn't happy with what one of the agencies was doing for him, and I was not either. They weren't basically doing anything. But eventually he realized if he did tell people that he had this problem, then he could get hired on as a person who has this problem, and then that becomes a non-issue in his work because they already know. And so now he has a good job with a great company who's probably going to be there forever. And so he has a job for life, we've been told. So, if your kid has a problem, don't gloss it over. Don't try to hide it from other people and act like they're defective and you don't want other people to know. Don't say, well, they're this and therefore they have no life or future or whatever, because, that's just crazy. Work with folks. Work with your child. Work with, ECE at school. And do what's best for your child. They can have a happy life, to the extent that they are able to. And that's what you should want. You should want what's best for your child, and you should want them to live their life to the fullest, just like you would want. Alone in his room, however, Tommy sits on the floor for hours, rocking back and forth, and sometimes banging his head against the wall or the floor until he bruises himself. Repeated visits to a variety of specialists have been of little help. Most recently, the team at the local community mental health clinic decided that Tommy is a classic case of early infantile autism. And like I said, any doctor worth their salt could have diagnosed that, to begin with. Like I said, I believe this perspective comes from a big city. They were talking about the guy, those delivery stuff. So I think maybe they might have the specialists at hand that we do when you have a smaller, people think we're here where I live is everything's so crowded and everything, and it kind of is gotten that way. But nothing like some of the other big cities. So But when Bob and Myrna asked for more explanation, they learned only that there are some other children who share Tommy's odd combination of behaviors, and that there is no effective treatment because, that's not. Autism is the way you are. You're born with it. There's not a treatment for it. There can be, training programs that they put them in, and that, there are places where they go to get, some physical therapy and other types of therapy, occupational therapy. But there is no cure for autism. So, unfortunately, a lot of folks write their kids off. Actually, we had one doctor say that he might have to end up in a institution when he's older, and it's like, no, you don't know my kid. He's not like gonna end up in an institution. He's too smart for that. And I was right, thankfully, not the doctor. So, the question of abnormality, and that is the question. What do Arnold, Elaine, and Tommy have in common? Each of them clearly exhibits abnormal behavior. In other words, behavior that is different either in kind or in degree from that of most people in our society. And that's, like I said, one of the first things they teach you in psychology. There's no such thing as normal. There's people who fall to this side and that side. Normal is what we all, in general, the majority of folks exhibit. Arnold gives the impression of being a generally bizarre individual. His gaze, his clothes, his living situation, and his long history of hospitalization all mark him as different. Elaine, on the other hand, leads a typical middle-class life, except that her moodiness and depression are much more extreme than the blues most of us get from time to time. That's because she's suffering from severe depression and anxiety. Tommy, in contrast, is strikingly different from other children because of his violent tantrums, emotional unresponsiveness, and self-destructive behavior. And that's when it's considered to be a problem. When you're a danger to yourself and or others, that's a problem. A major point thus becomes obvious from these brief case studies. Abnormality is highly diverse. And it is. It's as diverse as normality. Arnold, Elaine, and Tommy are far more different from each other than they are alike. What qualities do they share that make them appropriate subjects? And that is that they all exhibit some type of abnormal behavior. Some general criterias. Most mental health specialists agree on 3 general characteristics that indicate significantly abnormal behavior. Number 1, the behavior is markedly different from what is ordinarily seen in people of similar age, sex, background, and situations. The emphasis here is on our expectations. And as they teach you in Buddhism, your expectations are what lets you down a lot. That is, for a middle-aged woman like Elaine, staying inside all of the time, rarely getting out of bed, and almost never talking is abnormal. But the behavior would be perfectly normal for a 4-month-old baby. If a man suddenly started chasing someone, shoving and knocking over bystanders in his way, we would consider that abnormal. But not if he were a player in a football game. You see how this fits in there? Normal is based on the situation. What we label abnormal thus depends on some accepted standard of what is normal. That standard is different for different individuals, not only within our culture, but from one culture to another, and from one historical period to another. Thankfully, we know that talcum powder is bad for women to be using now. Back in my great-grandparents' day, they were talcum up everything, Now we know that's not something you should do because it can cause cancer. So from one historical period to another, things change as we learn more. 2. The behavior impairs the individual's ability to function normally, sometimes to a great degree, depending on, what the behavior is. That is, the behavior in question causes other abnormal behaviors or prevents normal behaviors. And that's kind of a red flag too. If this behavior is keeping you, like I said, when I was scared to leave the house because I had been attacked and there were like neighbors kind of harassing me and people looking in my windows, that kept me from going out and enjoying my life. And so that's why I went and got some help, because, I didn't want to be a dysfunctional mother. So, sometimes we realize the behavior we got going on is not very helpful or healthy for us. It's holding us back. And that's the time you should go talk to somebody and get this figured out so you can have a nice, normal life. Many people are mildly afraid of dogs, but some people are so terrified of meeting a dog that they are reluctant to go out of the house. And of course, that can go with any fear. So if you have a fear that is keeping you from doing anything, you should go talk to your mental health professional and get this worked on, because they can help you with this. They can expose you to your fears and get you, acclimated to some stuff so that you are able to have a more normal life. One behavior, avoiding dogs, thus keeps them from engaging in other activities appropriate for their age, sex, situation, and so forth. So, a behavior like that can stop you from having a life that you could otherwise be enjoying. Number 3, the behavior is disturbing to other people, and often to the individual who has the problem or problem as well. Sorry. This has got 2 sets of markings on it. So it not only bothers the people around them, but it bothers them as well. And that's a good cue to you that if something you're doing is bothering other people, but it also bothers you, that's probably a problem behavior. One characteristic shared by Arnold, Elaine, and Tommy is that they persist in behaviors that bring unhappiness to themselves and others. And so that is a problem. If you're doing something that makes you unhappy, you should know that's a problem and be aware and note that. And you probably need to go talk to someone about it. Most of us attempt to maximize the happiness and reduce the unhappiness in our lives. And that is a normal survival drive to make our life happier, not unhappier. So if you find yourself doing things that make your life unhappier, that's not normal. That's not, a behavior that ensures your survival. And that's a big thing with people with depression and anxiety. They will do things that do not make them happy because they are so deep in that depression and anxiety that they have become dysfunctional. And so they don't look for their higher good, their ultimate happiness. They will do things to keep themselves down. Their brain is actually thinking it's okay with these chemicals in it being the way they are, and it's going to keep the status quo, not risk anything new that might upset it. Individuals with markedly abnormal behavior patterns do this less than people in general. So, people with abnormal behavior are going to engage in things that are unhappy, causing situations and behaviors that can harm them. Often they appear insensitive to opportunities for pleasure, or rather unwilling to make the effort that most of us would make to take advantage of such opportunities. And that's something I talk to a lot of my students and coaching clients about is, taking the steps necessary to do what would, make you happy. And a lot of people are so depressed and anxious, they just are scared to take any step outside of their comfort zone. And in order to get anything you want, you're going to have to take some steps outside of your comfort zone. To put it another way, many abnormal behaviors do not appear to be acquired or maintained according to the general principles of learning. And remember all those guys we studied back in human development, see, it's all linked, about, Erickson and all those guys, about how children learn. And, they know that these behaviors are not behaviors that follow these principles of learning. Arnold's preoccupation with his white socks, Elaine's staring into space, and Tommy's banging his head against the floor are not rewarded in a consistent or straightforward fashion because these things are causing them harm. On the contrary, these behaviors have negative consequences for the person and everyone else involved. Because Arnold's socks, checking his socks, people know, oh, he's double checking whether he's wearing socks or not. Okay, buddy. So that's getting him some unwanted, probably, attention. And Elaine, she's just basically running the world over in her mind. So she's missing everything that's going on around her, not interacting with her family, so she's missing out. And of course, we know little Tommy banging his head on the floor. I mean, there are some children who have to wear helmets because they will do this to the point that they can cause themselves serious damage. Many behaviors seem to defy logic in this same way. For some of them, no one, not even professionals who have had a great deal of experience in this area, can offer an explanation that really works. Because some behaviors are so out of the ordinary that, they haven't had a lot of study and they haven't had a lot of, perusal of such things, for a word, to the point where they can say for sure this is why they're doing this. Failing to seek happiness is, of course, a rather subjective issue. But in general, most of us seek happiness. We seek enjoyment of our life. And people who don't do that and who purposely keep themselves from enjoying their life, they have a problem. Perhaps Arnold, Elaine, and Tommy are being reinforced in ways that are not obvious to us. It's something in their mind that by doing these things, it reinforces them in some kind of way. Or perhaps they are responding to rewards that are different from those that we seek. So, when Arnold checks his socks, it might reassure him that yes, he did wear his socks. They're on. Because somewhere in his mind there must be a fear that they're not, and that's why he's checking it out. And Elaine, the reward she's getting is to preoccupy her mind. She's keeping her mind busy so that it is not focusing on the problem. And the poor little, Tommy, he's just doing what the impulse is to do. And that's a problem with a lot of kids with autism, Asperger's, ADHD, ADD. Impulsiveness is a big thing. So it might not be that he's getting rewarded in any way by doing this. It might be that the impulse is so strong by not doing it, he makes himself feel worse than by doing it. And that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but I know that's a real thing. Oh my gosh. I'm trying to not sneeze, but it might not work. Oh. If their conception of what is rewarding is abnormal, it follows that their behavior would also be abnormal. Researchers have found evidence supporting these possibilities. The social context. Communal bathing, a relaxing and acceptable pastime in Japan, would shock many Americans. Such diverse reactions emphasize how standards of normal and abnormal behavior vary from one culture to another. And I know a man who went over into another country, and he went to the bathroom, and it was a communal bathroom, and he was going to the bathroom, and this woman come in and popped a squat, and he was like so embarrassed. And over there, that's perfectly normal. They have their needs, they take care of it, and they're not looking at your stuff. They don't think you're looking at their stuff. So no matter how we approach the question of abnormality, we find our expectations playing a central role. And remember what we said about expectations. Expectations of a thing are the thing that lets you down. But do all of us really have the same expectations about what is normal? And the answer to that is no. I'll answer that. They're not going to answer it. They're going to make it long, drawn out. But I'm going to tell you no. Because, I sometimes like to wear flower barrettes and clips in my hair. Now, do most women up in their 50s think that's normal? No, they think that's for little girls. But I say, who said that? No one said that. So it's a harmless abnormal behavior in my book that I enjoy because I think it looks pretty. So to me, it's not abnormal. To the extent that we do, how are these expectations determined? And that's by your upbringing and how you feel personally, the nature and nurture of you. No society has a list of behaviors it considers normal and abnormal, but all societies distinguish between the two. And in most cases, abnormal means unacceptable. As we have seen, the label abnormal is usually applied to these behaviors that do not serve the best interests of the person or other people. Banging your head against the wall is abnormal because most people don't do it, but also most people don't do it because it hurts and may cause serious injury. Thus, it is unacceptable not just because it is odd, but because it is maladaptive. It decreases the person's chances of surviving and thriving. And that is the definition of a maladaptive habit. It keeps you from thriving or even surviving. So that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope this helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And since we're into the heavy stuff now, I'm just going to say, this is an educational program. Please like and share it so we can spread it around the world. And since it is an educational program, it's not intended to diagnose or treat any mental illness. So if anything I have talked about today has triggered you, my advice is to go and see a mental health professional. Again, thanks for watching or listening. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.